The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
Welcome to this week's edition of WION VOA co-production. I'm your host, Susan Tehrani, coming to you live from New York City. We begin with a key foreign policy move in Washington. U.S. President Joe Biden signed legislation Wednesday providing $95 billion in aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan after months of tense negotiations in the U.S. Congress. VOA's congressional correspondent, Catherine Gibson, reports on what's next.
Urgently needed ammunition and supplies, soon on their way to Ukraine after months of waiting. U.S. President Joe Biden signing a bill Wednesday, sending more than $60 billion in aid to Ukraine.
This package is literally an investment, not only in Ukraine's security, but in Europe's security.
Ukrainian lawmakers are expecting a fast delivery now that funding has been approved.
The logistics for the shipments was already well established. Normally it takes not more than 48 hours to actually come to the front lines.
Meanwhile, Russia downplayed the impact the long-awaited weapons will have on the 2-year-old conflict.
All these new batches of weapons, which are probably already ready, will not change the dynamics at the front.
After months of debate over American involvement in foreign conflicts, the U.S. Senate overwhelmingly approved the legislation by a vote of 79-18 late Tuesday. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell worked closely with Democratic counterpart Chuck Schumer to pass the aid.
We tell our allies, we stand with you. We tell our adversaries, don't mess with us. We tell the world, the United States will do everything to safeguard democracy.
The measure gained significantly more Republican support after former President Donald Trump scaled back his criticism of sending more aid. The legislation also includes $26 billion in aid to Israel and $8 billion in funding to Taiwan and other Indo-Pacific countries to counter Chinese aggression. China condemned that aid early Wednesday.
We urge the U.S. side to honor its commitment of not supporting Taiwan independence with concrete actions and stop arming Taiwan in any way.
向台独分裂势力发出错误信号。
The legislation also includes a provision forcing TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance to divest ownership of the social media app within 1 year or face a ban in the United States. Catherine Gibson, VOA News.
Joining us now with additional reporting is VOA correspondent Jessica Stone. She's live at the White House. Hi, Jessica. The U.S. Senate has been weighing this proposal to force the sale of TikTok for some time, but Congress rarely targets a single company with legislation. And TikTok is popular in the United States, to say the least. So what appears to have turned the tide here?
Well, it's really this issue of misinformation, because about a third of Americans under the age of 30 do get their news from TikTok. And so what members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have been looking at is research that shows that subjects sensitive to China are actually being censored on the platform. That includes Hong Kong protests, things like pro-Ukraine or pro-Israel points of view. They're not as present on that platform as compared to other platforms. And that's really pushed some of these members of Congress over the edge, because we do limit foreign ownership of TV stations and radio stations in the United States. And this is the comparison that's being made that literally is believed to be the main reason that people have come together around this issue, because, as you say, it is very unusual.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Jessica, TikTok says that it will fight this law. What are the options there? And are there any potential buyers at this point?
Well, two questions there, of course. We have seen Chinese companies go through American courts before. I can think of Sany years ago in a matter of being divested in a transaction here in the United States. And not unlike that, we expect that TikTok will also go through the American courts and make the argument that they've made consistently, which is that forced divestment or forced sale of their company to an outside buyer amounts to a violation of their First Amendment rights, and the First Amendment right to free speech, and those of course using the platform and the violation of their speech. And they do have allies in the form of the American Civil Liberties Union, who have also supported them in court on that position. As for potential buyers, we've seen reporting about former U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who has already said on the record last month that he wants to put together a group of buyers to purchase TikTok. Kevin O'Leary, who's probably better known to those of us in the United States. He's a Canadian entrepreneur. He's very popular on a show called Shark Tank here in the United States. He has intimated that he would be interested in purchasing this. The CEO of the video sharing website Rumble also considered to be part of the fray. And the Wall Street Journal has also reported that former CEO of gaming platform Activision Blizzard is also interested in making an offer. So quite a few people around the world interested, particularly here in the United States, at taking a look at seeing if they can make good on or take advantage of the situation and keep TikTok running.
Fascinating. We'll be watching very closely. Jessica, please do stay with us while we go to a piece that you just produced yourself. So in the Solomon Islands, officials are counting ballots in a consequential national election that was held on April 17th. It's the first poll since the strategic Pacific country signed a security pact with Beijing. And who wins may dictate whether Solomons continues to draw closer to China or Washington. VOA's Jessica Stone reports.
Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, where Allied forces seized the advantage from the Japanese in the Pacific during World War II. It's now the backdrop for another pivotal struggle for influence in the South Pacific.
Strengthening relationship with China.
This time between political parties who want closer ties to China.
You want a better education?
And those looking to engage with Western democracies. In the third most populous province of Makira, election observers saw long lines of voters.
If you compare to the previous elections, the number of people turning up for vote is higher than for the previous elections.
Voters say they want more access to health care, education, and women's health, but they recognize there are geopolitical implications for the region.
Ever since we connected with China, they they helped us a lot in the development.
Yes, China supports us, but their support has strings attached to their projects.
Already the vote count shows the pro-China Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare has retained his parliamentary seat, but his Our Party failed to secure a clear majority, forcing it to form a coalition government.
Just because Sogavare may not win the election doesn't mean that things will shift back away from China, because we simply don't know what other players within the system China is supporting.
On a visit to the region over the weekend, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi warned against making the South Pacific the focus of U.S.-China rivalry.
Pacific Island countries are the home of the people of this region. They are not the backyard of any major country.
American political analysts say the continuation of Sogavare's pro-China policy could lead to limits on U.S. and allied military and commercial ship movement nearby.
The fact that the Chinese could have operations inside the Solomon Islands means that they would have an easier ability to surveil and to monitor U.S. and Australian and allied activity throughout the greater region.
And so as the count continues, some voters say what really matters is not foreign alliances, but empowering the people.
I don't like, when this is always a comment about China and the Western allies happening, how they influence us. It's supposed to come from within us.
Jessica Stone, VOA News.
VOA's Jessica Stone is still live with us at the White House. Jessica, thanks for sticking around. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is spending the end of this week in meetings with officials from Shanghai and Beijing. What issues have been discussed, and are there any signs of progress?
Yeah, so he just had a press conference just 3 hours ago now, where we understand he did make a lot of remarks on some progress, primarily that there will be AI talks, artificial intelligence talks, between the PRC and the United States in the coming weeks. And that is a breakthrough for this relationship, which of course has become more tense, particularly around the areas of technology and technology transfer and export controls. I do want to bring our viewers up to speed. President Xi Jinping himself did meet with Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Beijing. They had lengthy conversation. In that conversation, Xi Jinping told Blinken, quote, "The U.S. must accept China's rise in a positive light." Now, Blinken came for a number of reasons. One of the main ones being to discuss China's growing role in providing non-military assets to to Russia in the form of technology, things that can be used to help Russia rebuild its arsenal. And the United States has been very concerned about that, raised that issue with Chinese officials during this visit. Washington, in fact, is considering raising sanctions on Chinese banks that finance those transactions. That is just a step under consideration, according to U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. But Blinken also raised the issue of the Gaza conflict and how can China be more constructive in keeping that from spreading. He also raised the unfair trade practices that the United States believes China is employing, particularly flooding the U.S. market with lower-priced steel and aluminum. We've reported in the past that the U.S. is considering tripling tariffs on Chinese-made steel and aluminum. This whole issue of unfair trade practices has long been an irritant in the relationship, so it really comes as no surprise that was on the agenda. And of course, in recent weeks, the U.S. has increased technology exports, export controls, especially for semiconductors. The response from China during these meetings, particularly Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, is that these are efforts by the United States, he says, to limit the development and a threat to China's core interests. So that was really the exchange between the leadership of China and Secretary Blinken. Clearly, we did get an outcome. We were not hopeful of an outcome. So the fact that they will move forward with scheduling these artificial intelligence meetings between the two sides, quote, in the coming weeks is promising. But I know that from the Washington's point of view, they just want to keep the conversation going, keep the lines of communication going. And they are encouraged that China is taking these meetings, especially going into the election, where we know that that politicians often invoke the name of China just to get votes, and it is an important conversation to keep having at the leadership level for U.S. interests.
Yeah, no doubt. And another source of friction between the U.S. and China are the exercises in the South China Sea between militaries of the U.S. and the Philippines, which began this week. Has there been any effort to reduce tension on that front?
So on the diplomatic front, we know that this issue came up between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Chinese leadership. But at the same time, the mere fact that these exercises are going on, and in particular, that Washington sent a ground-based missile launch system to northern Philippines, which actually has a missile range of 1,600 kilometers. That did not make Beijing happy whatsoever. They consider this, quote, stoking military confrontation. The Philippines military has said that they are focusing with this exercise on, quote, territorial defense. Of course, there have been ongoing clashes between Chinese and Philippine maritime vessels, primarily between their coast guards and sometimes fishing vessels, around disputed areas in the South China Sea that China says are theirs, that the Philippines says are theirs. And the reality is that the U.S. has recently, during the trilateral summit here at the White House, President Biden said, look, if there is a threat to Philippine safety, the U.S. is treaty bound in a mutual defense treaty to come to Philippines' aid. And so the concern here is that it could spread into a wider conflict, certainly something that both the U.S. and China are trying to avoid. But sometimes the words are strong in terms of what's actually happening with these exercises.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much for all of that. Jessica Stone joining us live from the White House. Jessica, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Well, passions and tensions are running high on U.S. college campuses. Anti-Gaza war protests are spreading across universities nationwide. Both authorities and the police have begun to push back forcefully. There were protest encampments on more than a dozen college campuses across the United States, including Harvard, NYU, UCLA, George Washington University, MIT, as well as others. In the past 24 hours, over 500 people were arrested in the protests at these colleges. Columbia University is at the forefront of the protest. The university administration in New York backed off from an overnight deadline for protesters to abandon their encampments. The deadline was extended for the fourth time over the last 2 days. Meanwhile, a pro-Palestinian U.S. group filed a federal civil rights complaint against the university after last week's arrest of over 100 demonstrators by the NYPD. At the University of Southern California, the graduation ceremony is canceled for so-called safety concerns at the campus. Hundreds of protesters were arrested at the campus as well. And these are the visuals from Harvard, where protesters set up multiple camps in support of the Palestinians.
We may have been inspired from what is happening at Columbia, at Yale, at Harvard, at UNC, at Vanderbilt, at all these universities in America. But our solidarity remains first and foremost with the Palestinian people.
As authorities struggle to contain the protests, there are reports of police using excessive force. In some cases, they also used chemical irritants and tasers to disperse the crowds. Meanwhile, similar protests are also taking place in other countries. A student blocked access in Paris to the prestigious Sciences Po University over the war in Gaza. They demanded that the institution condemn Israel's actions, while they chanted slogans in support of Palestine.
We're asking, as is traditional,